Hello, my name is Elias Smith, and today we'll be talking about the Gulf Coast oil spill, also known as the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The spill, which happened in 2010, represents the culmination of a failure of oversight, as well as the struggles of adaptation that come with managing a spill of this caliber for the first time. First and foremost, I think it's important that we have a little bit of background information on this. The Deepwater Horizon spill occurred on April 20th, 2010. Reportedly, a concrete core was used to seal the oil well for later use so that oil could not escape from where they were drilling. However, the concrete core was far too weak to withstand the actual pressures being exerted on it by the rig, and on the night of the explosion, a surge of natural gas actually shot through the concrete core and up to the platform where it ignited and caused the ensuing explosion. In total, 11 people were killed and another 17 were injured. From here, BP employed multiple different strategies to curb the oil that was spouting from this oceanic hole, and eventually they came to the final solution, and involving placement of a physical cap over the gushing well on July 15th, 2010. Once the flow was stemmed, they would then pump cement into the channel to completely kill the flow of oil into the ocean. In total, an estimated 4 million barrels of oil were pumped out over an 87-day period, culminating in the largest unintentional oil spill in history. There are many ways in which the Gulf Coast oil spill made waves through local populations. The environmental impact was undeniable, with cleanup efforts that continue to this day. Economically, the residents of the coastal areas were impacted severely, with the tourism and fishing industries taking the brunt of the blow. Understandably, BP had a massive legal fallout as a result of the spill, including massive fines due to violations of many laws and regulations. First off, I think it's really important to outline the differences between an oil spill and an oil slick. An oil spill is whenever any amount of oil is spilled into the environment. And a slick forms when you have a layer of oil that is lighter than the water. And so you have this layer of oil which is resting on top of it or resting on top of the ground. Different oil spill cleaning methods will work on slicks through a variety of different actions, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But it's important to note that in the United States, before a rig is ever constructed, a report must be sent to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement, or the BOE-MRE. And this is supposed to outline the potential spill trajectories as well as environmentally sensitive areas that may encounter the oil in the event of a spill. The response itself is separated in the U.S. into the federal, state, and international authorities, with coastal and offshore areas monitored by the Coast Guard and inland areas monitored by the EPA. Finally, there is a wide array of technology available to monitor the extent of the spill, including aerial surveillance, infrared, optical, and satellite remote tracking systems. These help to determine which response modalities we should employ, as well as the overall location of the spill. Each of these cleanup methods has its own set of benefits as well as drawback, and they're separated into overall physical and chemical methods. As for our physical methods, we have booms, skimmers, and sorbents. Booms are useful for physically containing the spread of oil from a central location, and they represent part of the first line of defense and containment in the event of a spill. But they're limited based on the site availability as well as the weather conditions. If you have turbulent weather, then this surface level approach is no longer going to be capable of holding the oil in. Then we have skimmers, of which there's many different types of skimmers, but overall they function to actually remove the oil that is kept in position by these booms. They represent the second of our first line of defense. And you can see here in this picture, we actually have a boom and a skimmer working together. The boom is maintaining the oil in one location, and the skimmer is actually pulling off the oil and it's collecting it into these 3 barrels as is shown here. And then finally, for our physical pieces, You have sorbents, which are mostly used for small spills, and they're able to absorb or adsorb to oil to help with faster cleaning. They are usually highly oleophilic or oil-loving and highly hydrophobic or water-hating. And once you use them, they soak up the oil, and then you can dispose of them as you would any other piece of trash, or you could also burn them. As for the most common chemical methods of cleaning up oil spills, burning oil is the classic method of cleaning up an oil spill, and it has its advantages as well as disadvantages like everything else. Its primary advantage, it's cheap, and you can do it very quickly. The downside, though, is that you're going to have to monitor air quality because of all the different fumes and byproducts that are going to be given off from burning this oil. Additionally, sometimes the oil can be so thick or emulsified that it actually doesn't burn completely. And so you wind up with oiled areas that still actually haven't been cleaned even though you've burned them. Then you have dispersants, which break oil into smaller and smaller droplets so they have a lower impact on their surroundings. Unfortunately, like burning, they may have little effect on denser emulsified oils and are only really effective in lighter oiled areas. And then finally, you have solidifiers, which bind chemically with the oil to help form a natural barrier around the edges of the slick in a similar fashion to the booms that we've already talked about. You would take the solidifying agents, spread them around the edges of your oiled area, and this will help contain them physically, similar to the booms that we've already talked about. And from there, now that you have your oil isolated, you can then also scoop it out by using these solidifying agents because it clumps the oil together and makes it easier to collect. The downside here is, again, sometimes the solidifying agents don't work very well on oil fields that are too thick or too emulsified. Whenever people think about the immediate health effects of oil exposure, they think of the acutely toxic effects. Some of them can include respiratory and dermal irritation, headaches, eye irritation, nausea, and dizziness. These sorts of effects come in addition to worker safety, which includes on-the-job injuries, such as any sort of trauma or heat stroke, heat stress, and heat-related illnesses. The National Institute of Occupational and Safety Health tracked injuries and illnesses reported to the Unified Area Command over the Deepwater Horizon response as is shown here. Mental health, however, is another aspect of this spill that few are truly able to take stock of. There are difficulties quantifying mental health following the spill, but there have been standard post-crises responses that have been seen, with calls to mental health and domestic abuse hotlines shooting up following the spill. Much of this comes from disturbances in day-to-day life from the areas impacted, as well as the number of livelihoods that this spill threatened. Finally, the ecosystem itself was impacted, with shorelines and animals now coated in. Thousands of animals were exposed to this oil as a result of the spill, and around 23,000 birds were killed directly as a result of the spill through direct exposure or accidental consumption of the oil. Additionally, dolphins exposed to the oil have had chronic health issues ever since, and they've had increased issues maintaining pregnancy. In fact, current evidence suggests that this oil spill is the single largest contributor to what is now the largest and longest lasting dolphin die-off on record in the Gulf of Mexico. Additionally, the impact on the shorelines and the worries surrounding them are undeniable. Around 700 kilometers of coastline was exposed to oil, with around 41% of the coastline being heavily oiled. The vegetation in these areas suffers directly and most dies off rather quickly. As a result, many of the roots holding the soil and shoreline together are lost, and the risks of shoreline erosion shoots up. Shoreline erosion represents not only a loss of beaches, but also the marshes and estuaries, which each represent ecosystems teeming with diversity. As of just a few years ago, marshlands and coastal areas were still heavily impacted, and unfortunately the rate of recovery is not what was once expected. The costs that were associated with the spill were, to put it, immense. At the time, it was estimated by Harvard Economics that the spill would have cost of $22.7 billion for the area over 3 years to the tourism industry alone. That's not even to mention the multi-billion-dollar fishing industry that was also threatened. The spill itself created restricted areas of seafood harvesting for fear of exposing consumers to high levels of oil. And this feeds back into the overall system of affecting individuals' livelihoods, mental health, as well as how are people going to live in this area if they can't actually hold a job here from either the tourism or the seafood industry. For comparison, in 2008, the Gulf Coast area sustained around 400,000 jobs in the tourism industry alone, with tourists spending an estimated $34 billion that year. This is not even to mention the costs of cleaning the spill, which every single modality has its own individual cost. Natural attenuation costs $1,286 per ton. Burning has a cost of $3,127 per ton. Dispersants have a cost of $5,633 per ton. Mechanically removing the oil has a cost of $9,611 per ton. And when all else fails, manual cleaning has a cost of $23,403 per ton of oil removed. The numbers are massive, and for a spill of this size, it's completely understandable. People were put out of jobs, and one of the few proposed tactics of offsetting these issues was spending more money, around $500,000, on a marketing campaign to persuade people to visit these oil-stained beaches. Following the spill in 2010, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a civil and criminal suit against British Petroleum for violations of the Clean Water and Oil Pollution Acts. In 2012, BP reached a settlement where I've seen multiple sources, but in total they had to pay around $20 billion in civil court penalties alone, separate from the private claim payments, which added to another couple $billion in their settlements. In total, BP faced 14 legal charges and for their gross negligence in this explosion, 11 felony manslaughter charges for those who died, and another 3 for violations of the different environmental protection laws which they breached. It's also important to note that Transocean and Halliburton also had to pay settlements in these cases, just not to the same level as BP. Now, moving forward, there's always going to be new technological advances, and the same is true whenever it comes to how we approach oil spills. Recent developments in oil solidifiers have produced new gelators, which function as solidifying agents like we've already talked about. With excellent solidifying capacities, these gelators are non-toxic to marine life and are actually recyclable for multiple gelation events. Additionally, we continue to refine the response system to these events. Volunteers and contracted workers were rostered in multiple different ways, which helped with communicating information through such large groups, which is something that we can take if something like this were to ever happen again. Health responses have primarily been education driven, and while there have been issues with response, education, and distribution of personal protective equipment, it's still important to note that these are areas that can be improved, as appropriate work tools are integral to safe and effective responses. The NIOSH has also worked to devise new guidance principles and development of additional routes of communication such as blogs and emergency response websites to maintain a constant line of information to workers. By using the most up-to-date technology, it's been seen that the coordination efforts have been using this as a massive boon to their productivity and efficiency. So throughout this talk, we've learned about the buildup to this disaster, as well as the different methods employed and those currently employed to help address oil spills. There's multiple ways in which the spill still impacts citizens and the environment to this day, and the damages may still cause irreversible harm to the environment that we're still watching. Workers and residents, health, the wildlife, and the economy were all threatened due to this mishap, and while oil containment strategies continue to improve, it would be most impactful to never worry about this sort of event ever happening again. Here, I'd like to give a small plug towards alternative energy sources and to plant the seed keep them in mind as alternatives to these large oil rigs. But I won't go too far into that because that's another talk. So thank you and have a nice day.